All right, welcome to the June meeting of the Pikes Peak Mycological Society, another remote meeting due to COVID-19. It sounds likely that we're going to be doing this for the rest of the season because our normal meeting location, the Bear Creek Nature Center, has physical distance, social distance limitations of about 10 people in that space, and we'd like to include more than 10 people if possible. So this has been a workable solution this year, and it's actually really been great because we can extend the possibility of having lectures from people who are outside of Colorado. So that's been okay. So if you are watching, there's a chat window on YouTube where you can ask questions of the speaker or participate in the conversation. So please do that. I'm going to be monitoring that, and I will relate those questions as we go. Just introductions real quick. I'm Ben Kinsley. I'm currently 2020 president of Pikes Peak Mycological Society. And with us, we have Alyssa. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm the secretary and webmaster for Pikes Peak Mycological Society. Happy to be here.
And Beth.
Hi, I'm off mute. I'm Beth Leake, and I'm the treasurer for dues, 2020 dues. You can go to pikespeakmyc.org and click on join to pay. And if you have any questions, my email's in there. Thanks.
And Mercedes.
Hey, I'm Mercedes Perez-Whitman. I am co-editor of the PPMS newsletter.
Thanks. And then Elena is our speaker. We'll introduce you more formally later, but you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. My name's Elena, and I'm based in San Francisco. And I'm going to be talking about Koji and fungal fermentation today.
Awesome. I'm really excited about that. Before we turn it over, there's just a couple maybe business things we should talk about. First, I was reading in the newspaper today that Colorado is on what they're calling a flash drought. It's a pretty extreme drought conditions in southern Colorado, so it's not looking good out there for mushrooms, unfortunately. I know we all really need to be foraging right now, but it seems likely that this might be a pretty dry season. We're still scouting, we're still looking. I've been finding agaricus in city parks where watering is happening, but now we're on watering restrictions, so I don't know if that's going to continue. I know there have been some oyster mushrooms found. I know Brian and Jennifer have been out scouting like crazy, and it's just really dry out there. So you haven't missed any forays except the one. We did have one that some of you guys came to, thank you. And then it started raining and it poured the entire time. And we all left early because we were soaking wet. And ironically, that was pretty much the only rain we've had for a while. So as soon as we feel like the conditions are good enough, we will announce something. But so just keep an eye on your emails and on Facebook. And we are looking, we are paying attention, but it's just been really dry. And we're probably in for a really dry season, unfortunately. What else? Alyssa, you had a thought.
Yes, I just wanted to share the information about the search and rescue fund. I don't know if any of you have heard of it or not, but if not, you can get a Corsair card, it's what it's called, for Colorado Search and Rescue Fund. So basically, it's not an insurance card, so it doesn't pay for anything necessarily, but it does guarantee that your local search and rescue is funded, so that if you do get lost in the woods and need to contact search and rescue, they'll come find you. You can sign up somewhere. You can sign up. Oh, I should have had this. I think it's just Corsair.org, but I'll share it. I'll share the information in the chat, in the YouTube chat. It's $3 for 1 year, $12 for 5 years. I got the 5-year card because it's $12. And you get a nice little card that you can print and put in your pack or whatever you have.
And it's per person, like it's
per person.
Okay, great. Thanks for finding that out.
Sure.
Mercedes, do you want to talk about this giant thing behind me here? So if you have just an announcement, Jesse's not here, but the newsletter is out. She sent that out earlier. It should be in your inboxes. And this month's newsletter is dedicated to DIY laminar flow hoods. And Mercedes, you want to tell us more?
Yeah, sure. So we made this flow hood for mushroom cultivation. I should say I held like pieces while Ben and Jesse cut them and did all the design work because I don't know what I'm doing in that respect. But the idea is that you can rent this flow hood out. Members can rent it out, and we're still kind of working through details on what that looks like payment wise. But yeah, so, and also it might be a little difficult to transport. So there's some kinks, but it's really exciting. I know personally that not owning a flow hood can be rather limiting in terms of what I want, to be able to try out and learn and practice in the realm of cultivation. So we're hoping to make it more accessible to everyone. And yeah, more details to come. And the newsletter special article that Jesse worked on looks really amazing, and hopefully will encourage people to also make their own and that will cost quite a substantial less amount of money in comparison to ones that I generally see online. So yeah.
Yeah, just for reference, the HEPA filter right here you need a really high efficiency, 99% effective HEPA filter so that we don't, right? There's a fan up here, a blower fan that blows air through this filter, and it keeps air moving. So when you're doing home inoculations, you're not getting contaminants, and you need something really pretty effective here so that you're not getting contaminants from the air intake, right? And that filter right there costs about $215, and the fan itself costs about $250. So not even including the other materials, you're in about $500, which is why in the newsletter we said we'd take a $500 deposit. But we think that after thinking about that more, that might be too prohibitive for some people, and we really want this to be available to anyone who wants to use it. But we also need to make sure this screen is so easily damaged, and we just need to make sure we don't rent it out once and everything gets damaged, and we can't just keep putting money back into that, right? So we're thinking about that still, but Mercedes is going to be point person for this, right? And yes, we can, once we learn more, we will let you know. But if you're interested in it, I think you can email Mercedes at editor@pikespeakmic.org, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Thanks for filling in the blanks on, what even a laminar flow hood is and all of that. So
if they tuned into your talk, they would already know probably. Cool. Excellent. And then finally, we wanted to say, these were really popular last season. We have bumper stickers that say "Eat more mushrooms," Pikes Peak Mycological Society. These sold out, but we got more, and then we've had no physical in-person meetings. So if anyone wants one, we sell these for $5. Right now, we're going to have to include a stamp on there. So let's say $5.50. If you want to order one, you can either send a check to Beth through the address is on our join page on the website. The address is on the member application form. And if you send a physical check to Beth with maybe a note about what it's for, she'll send you one of these. You can also, if you want to do it through PayPal, there's a donate button. You can donate $5.50 and write a note with your address in there, and we can send you bumper stickers. But we have them. We will continue to have them, but I don't know that we'll have any in-person meetings this season, so I wanted to make sure people know about these. All right. Any other thoughts, anybody, before I turn it over? Cool. So read the newsletter. If you don't want to rent it, you can make your own. And some of these materials you don't have to necessarily buy new, and you might be able to do it a little bit cheaper if you find a blower fan that's used. But the newsletter should be in your inboxes, or if you're a member and you didn't get that email for some reason, it's on the newsletters page, and you can use your member login to log into that page and download. All right, so I would like to introduce Elena now and turn it over. So Elena Sue is with us, joining us virtually, remotely from San Francisco, Elena is a fermentress focused on transforming foods with the magic of microbes and Koji. We're going to learn a lot more about what Koji is in a minute. What makes her most excited is creating new food products and flavors using local produce and whole utilization techniques. Elena has experience teaching Koji workshops and crafting ferments for local pop-up diners and events. And currently, she is hunkered down at home working on launching unique, great tasting fermented food products in the Bay Area. And I'm really excited to learn more about this. And I wanted to kind of add to that. There's a nice book that's fairly new out by Lawrence Millman called The Fungipedia. And I was reading the other day the passage about microfungi, which is what Koji, all their molds and yeasts and things fall into, the category or classification they fall into. And I thought I would start off with a little definition of what microfungi are. So microfungi is an artificial classification based primarily on size. Microfungi tend to be a millimeter or less, which means they can be discerned in the field only by those with very strong eyes or a very good hand lens. Most microfungi reproduce asexually by releasing or breaking off spores from their mycelia. Some provide excellent dining opportunities to small insects. Others regard our own food as a dining opportunity. An example is the Zygomycete Rhizopus stolonifer, which delights in consuming stored bread. A few microfungi like noble rot are economically valuable. Microfungi include yeasts, rusts, mildews, and molds. Without them, soy sauce, tempeh, and miso, not to mention alcoholic drinks, wouldn't exist. Without them, valley fever, rice blast, athlete's foot, and candida infections wouldn't exist either. So now that we're all very excited, let's turn it over to Elena. Elena, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to turn on speaker view and take it away.
Okay. All right, so I prepared a presentation for everyone, but before I get started on that, on my PowerPoint, I wanted to show you guys a tray of Koji that I started about, today's Wednesday, so I started this Monday night. I started this about 9 p.m. and I pulled it this morning, probably around 10. So Koji really has a 36-hour, 40-hour life cycle until it fully matures. So this is the tray here. As you can see, it's kind of, you know, when you first start, it's literally just rice, and then the mycelium just binds the entire tray together. So if I go ahead and try to lift this, which I'm going to right now, you can see that it's basically a big chunk of myceliated fungi grown on the substrate, which is rice. So you can also grow it on soybeans, you can grow it on barley, you can basically grow it on anything as long as there is available starches and proteins for the fungi to latch onto. So just kind of wanted to show you guys that, and you know, and then you can also see how pillowy and cushiony this is. I mean, it really, this is just, we use organic Lundberg white long grain rice sourced from the Sacramento Valley. That's pretty local to us, and it's pretty amazing that you can get rice to turn into this just within 36 hours. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Okay, so Koji is really, you know, it's a 2,500-year-old mold, which is really, really interesting because there has been a lot of interest revived. It's kind of like a renaissance with Koji right now. A lot of chefs are using it and they're talking about it. If you go on Instagram, a lot of the fermentation community and, hashtag Koji Builds community, it's really been a growing topic, and people are more curious about this recently. I think it really started with, people initially get excited about sauerkraut, and then you start progressing into trying, learning more and more. And then, and then you kind of stumble onto Koji, and we're starting to realize that it's not limited to just miso, soy sauce, and sake. And we'll just go ahead and talk about that. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so what is Koji? So most people, you have eaten it if you've had, any soy sauce, in the little packets, or, miso, rice vinegar, sake. These are all common things that Koji is made out of. It is a fungi, but unlike mushrooms, mushrooms produce a fruiting body, and Koji is considered a multicellular fungi, and they are made up of tiny filaments called hyphae, which turn into mycelium, similar to a mushroom. But instead of, the fruiting body, we get a mold fungi that really matures when it's done growing. And fungi, what's really interesting about fungi is that they secrete enzymes to digest their food and their substrates to really feed themselves. That's the magic of that's what's so special about Koji is that unlike mushrooms, Koji produces a plethora of enzymes. In particular, we're interested in 3 enzymes, which we'll go into a little bit later. But, these enzymes really break down our foods and make them bioavailable to us. When you have starches, when you have proteins, these are large, molecules, and Koji is able to break those down into simple sugars, into amino acids, which really translate into umami, and breaking down those fatty acids, which really kind of give us that smell. When you're smelling something and it smells really good, Koji really helps give us all of those effects. And what's really interesting is that this stuff has been used for thousands of years. When I really think about biotech, most people will think about, all those big companies right now, like Roche, and, they're doing all of these, technology, pharmaceutical technology. But when I think of biotech, I really think about Koji, because it really is the original thing that humans were using. You're talking about using these live organisms to produce and break down products into something that is more bioavailable to us. And with Koji, there's kind of two parts of the fermentation process. The first part is really the solid state fermentation, and then it goes into a secondary fermentation. And when I talk about fermentation, the definition of fermentation is really the chemical breakdown of products, or using microbes. So you're changing one thing to another simply by using microbes. And so when we talk about Koji, you're first growing it on to a substrate, and that's the solid state fermentation. And then it goes through a secondary change where you're then using it to turn your Koji into maybe sake or soy sauce or something like that. So it goes from rice to Koji, and then you're using the Koji to turn it into something else. What's really, really interesting is that most people don't know this, but a lot of this technology is also kind of used in modern day uses, such as laundry detergent. The Koji produces a lot of enzymes, and one of them is lipase. And a lot of commercial laundry companies actually use this to kind of break down the oils and the fats in your clothing while, during a laundry cycle, to help get rid of stains. Something else that's kind of, similar to mushrooms is, a lot of people know that oyster mushrooms, for example, have, bioremediation. It's used for bioremediation, where people are using mushrooms to, clean up oil spills and things like that. With Koji, the enzymes are able to break down compostable plastics and, and that's pretty amazing. So it goes beyond just food. So a little bit background on Koji is that it actually originated in China, and it really started with, people they left some rice out or some millet out, and they realized it got a little bit, it was wild Koji in the air, and they realized, it smelled pretty good. And so, some bold person decided to take a bite and realize that, wow, this is really tasty. My rice has now been transformed from just regular rice to something sweet. And what's happening there is really the enzymes are breaking down the starches in the rice and turning them into sugars. So that's kind of how it really got started. And what happened was people were starting to realize they could use this to preserve foods. So originally it was really started, with preserving fish and poultry, things like that. And they would just mix the Koji that was grown on millet. It was mostly millet back in the day, and then it kind of went to rice and barley, but it was really millet when it first started, and using that to mix with salt to kind of preserve foods. And then what happened was, between the Chow and the Han Dynasty, there was an agricultural revolution that really happened in China, and they were able to, they really got down farming, and they had a surplus, of soybeans and rice and things like that. And that's when they started thinking, oh, wow, okay, instead of trying to preserve our fishes and turning that into something good, or our poultry, we can maybe do something with all these soybeans. And that's kind of how soy sauce really got started. Which is really crazy to think that, we've been making soy sauce for almost 2,000 years. And, most people don't really know how it's made. And we can talk a little bit about that later, but that's really how it started. And then afterwards, about 1,000 years later, it actually got introduced to Japan. And so there is documentation of a traveling monk that went from China to Japan, and he had brought over a jar of they call it zhang in Chinese, and really it was just black beans that had the mold grown on it and salted, and it's similar to a miso, but instead of soybeans, think of black beans that they were using to salt and dry. And that was brought into Japan, and from there it kind of really evolved into miso. And the Japanese was very good at documenting everything that they were doing, and they were also very, very vigilant about making sure that they were isolating all of the microbes in this mold, because in China, what they had was, it was not just Koji. There was also wild yeast in there. There was also, what tempeh is made out of, which is the rhizopus or rhizae, that was also in there. So Japan, really was able to isolate just the Koji and Koji is really, it's called Aspergillus or rhizae, and they're able to isolate that and really refine the mold, or the fungi, to what we know today. So this is kind of the breakdown of the life cycle of Koji. I don't have a photo of a 0 hour mark, but really at 0 hours, you're just looking at, some beans, or you're just looking at some rice with the spores sprinkled on it. And what happens at 12 hours, as you can see in this first photo, is that, the rice is really starting to turn kind of powdery, but it's not at this point a mycelium. The mycelium really hasn't started to knit into a cake form like I had originally shown everyone at the beginning of the presentation. At this point, at 12 hours, you can pick up the rice, and it's pretty simple. You pick it up and it still feels like rice in your hand. It'll kind of crumple and fall apart. Maybe a few kernels or few pieces of rice will be stuck together, but there's not going to be a mycelial mat. what happens shortly after though is in 38 hours, you do get the mycelial mat. And, you know, here we have just the rice koji. I kind of stacked it up into a koji mountain because I thought that was kind of funny and fun. And then to the right of here, it's some soybeans and millet that we actually use to make our gluten-free soy sauces. And we also sell kits so people can ferment their own soy sauce if they're interested. But this picture here, you can see that it's starting to, this is more like the 38, 35-hour mark, and this is more 40. And you can tell with the color because it's starting to spore out with kind of like the yellow spores here. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because that just kind of imparts a deeper mushroomy kind of flavor. And for soy sauce production, you actually want it to go a little bit darker like this. This is when you really want to pull it to make soy sauce. But if you're just, making something like sake, for example, you want your koji to be really white, and before it really hits maturity, that's like an hour before it hits maturity, that's really when you want to pull it. Versus soy sauce, you really want those enzymes to be kind of more funky, and it's going to be fermenting for 6 months to a year, and that flavor really imparts something special to the brine. And this is actually a photo of, we went mushroom hunting in Shasta about a few weeks ago, almost a month now, I guess. And we had accidentally left some koji in the incubation chamber, thinking that we had already batched everything and made everything that we needed. But we accidentally left one chunk in there, and we turned the incubation chamber off. But what ended up happening was the moisture in the chamber and the leftover heat was able to get the koji to kind of really spore out. And in this photo, you really see, 50-hour plus of the koji just really going all out to spore. Most people, have asked, like, can you use this to propagate, a fresh batch to turn it into this? And for me, the answer is yes, but you wouldn't really want to, because what happens at this stage is, there might be other microbes or other things in the air present that could contaminate a fresh batch of koji. So why go through all that trouble when you can go ahead and purchase spores fairly cheaply and easily, and to make sure that you have the cleanest spores possible. And here, this is just the Aspergillus oryzae. This is, the scientific name, the Latin name of koji, and what it looks like under the microscope. It really kind of looks like a dandelion flower almost. And these are all the spores here. And as it matures, there's going to be more little dots here getting ready to go. And, just a simple thing of the wind, the spores are off. And that's another reason why I don't personally like to handle super mature spores, because it can be dangerous. I do try to wear a mask at all times while I'm handling this mold, because breathing in spores into your lungs is just not a good idea. So we're going to talk a little bit about the enzymes that koji makes and why it's important. So there's three main enzymes that we're mostly concerned about, and it's lipase, protease, and amylase. You can try to really figure out, like, what, depending on what you need, you want to set your incubation chamber, or you want to set your temperature to these certain temperature ranges. For example, if you want to, lipase breaks down fat, protease breaks down proteins, and amylase breaks down starches, which turn into sugar. So if you wanted to kind of break down some meat, for example, a fatty piece of meat, you would probably incubate it in between these two temperatures, because you want to break down fat, but you also want to break down protein, tenderizing it to make it more delicious. For example, if you were to make soy sauce, I usually typically like to incubate my koji around this temperature, 80 to 90, because what I'm really interested in is the bean, the proteins in the beans really need to be broken down, similar to also making misos, for example. Anything that has protein and you want to break that down, and, proteins broken down by enzymes equals amino acids, and amino acids equals umami and delicious. And, with amylase, this is really important if you're trying to make, alcohol, if you're trying to make vinegars, if you're trying to make, something sweet, so this is the temperature range that you would want to incubate your Koji at, because by breaking down, the starches, the more potent your enzymes are, the better chance they are at breaking down the things you need it to. So in the case of amylase, if I wanted to make something sweet, like there's a traditional drink in Japan called amasake, which is basically just a precursor to sake. And all it really is just Koji rice that I've definitely incubated at 95 degrees to kind of push out all of the amylase enzymes and make that available, and introduce that to a new starch source, which is fresh rice. And all that available starch will now be available for the amylase enzymes to go ahead and digest, which will produce something very, very sweet. So in this case, it would be the amasake, or it's like a sake pudding. It's what it is prior to turning it into sake. And then from that point, if you wanted to turn that into sake, you would go ahead and just add some yeast in there and ferment all those sugars into alcohol. And then, if you wanted vinegar, then what you would do is simply add a vinegar mother in there and let all that acidic bacteria go ahead and turn that into vinegar. So these three enzymes, it just kind of depends on what you're trying to make, and depending on that, that's the temperature you really want to incubate. And this little picture right here, I just kind of pulled from the internet. I thought it was kind of similar to to Koji, because it's a picture of a mushroom, and you can see the little hyphae there, and it's also secreting these digestive enzymes to break down all the nutrients it needs in the soil so that the fruiting body can come up. And that's exactly what Koji does. So what do we need for Koji to thrive? So really, Koji really just wants a few things. It wants somewhere clean. So if you're working with this fungi at home, you really want to make sure that your workstation is clean. So, every time I'm, going in to touch my rice, I wash my hands. The trays that I use to incubate, I wash those. I want to make sure that, I'm giving the Koji the best chance of survival, and also to make sure that it doesn't have to work to outcompete other things that might be present. I've had once or twice I've had wild Aspergillus niger come in, and that's black mold. And only because I wasn't really careful. I actually left the window open, and when you're trying to grow these things with the window open, you're letting yourself be more susceptible to other things in the air coming in and taking over your substrate. Something else that's, a few other things that are important is, it really needs starch, it needs protein, it needs some sort of food source. So either starch or protein, it really needs to eat some of that, or even fat, to really be able to survive. Most importantly though, it is starch and protein. And also you want to make sure that you're choosing the right grains. For example, I typically work with just polished long grain white rice, but I have grown it on soybeans. I've grown it all sorts of beans, actually heirloom beans. I've grown it on carrots. I've grown it on beets, potatoes, all sorts of vegetables. But you want to make sure that the outside is not a hard shell. So for example, if you think about brown rice, it has that hull outside. For a little spore to go in there and really try to penetrate that, it's going to be hard. So, if you're working with things that have a hull, you want to make sure that you are milling it, or, you're cracking it, or doing something so that it's an accessible food source for your mold to grow. In addition, you want to make sure that there's good surface area. If it's, really like if you're trying to grow, like for example, on like rice that's almost porridge, that's going to be really tough because it's not going to be able to establish that mycelial mat. It really needs, good surface area so that the spores can go in there and establish itself and have something to hold on to so that it can really take over. And then it also needs hot and humid temperatures or environment. Going back to the previous slide, I talked about the temperature range, and then you really want to make sure it's also humid because it needs a little bit of humidity to grow. And for me personally, I use an office humidifier to something that you plug in at your desk. I plug into my incubation chamber to kind of mist some water just to make sure it stays humid in there. But if you don't have that, you can always use like a warm towel, or a towel that is wet, but you've wrung out and placed on top of the tray to kind of create that humid environment for the mold to be to be successful. So, the best way to really propagate this at home is really, it's super simple. Traditionally, you're talking about, steaming the rice because we're going back to this idea of wanting to make sure that the mold is, or, it has the best surface area for it to grow. So when you're thinking about steaming rice, right, or steaming your substrate, you're not letting the substrate be sitting in water, allowing it to get kind of gelatinous and kind of sticky. It really is being cooked by steam. So, with that technique, your substrate becomes al dente. And so that's really the best way to grow it. Traditionally, that's how it's done. But, in modern times, it's tough, right? Like for you to go and boil the water and then put, get a tray and then put the rice in, or your substrate in a mesh bag and then have it sit there and then have it steam. And, and I've done all of that. And, I will admit that's the best way to grow it. The koji that the best koji I've ever grown, I've done it like that. But it's not necessarily, time-wise and when you're comparing results, I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% worth it. One exception I will make for that is making sake. Sake really is more of a really intensive, just to have those flavors really come out like really good sake, you really want to make sure you're steaming the rice. But for my purposes, I'm making soy sauces, I'm making misos, I'm doing things like that. I find that the best way to do it at home is really through a rice cooker. And I have done, it took me almost a year to really figure this out because I've done it all sorts of ways. I've had books that said, you can do it in microwave, which you can. You can also boil it, which you can. But the best way to do it is with a rice cooker. So my method is, I really just wash the rice until the water becomes very clear. And this is a really important step when you're doing this at home because essentially all that when you're washing rice, or washing your beans, all of that stuff that's out there, that water, that murky water, that's just excess starch. And if you leave that there when you're cooking, what ends up happening is your substrate becomes very sticky and it's hard to handle. And that also translates into your substrate really sticking together, which is not allowing it's not allowing a good surface area. So what I like to do is I wash the rice for about 10 minutes until the water is completely clear. And then I put the water right like 1 to 2 centimeters right above that rice line. When you're typically cooking rice in a rice cooker, I've always had this thing where it's like, right to your pinky right here, that first line to your pinky. That's how my mom taught me how to do it. But with Koji, you just want 1 to 2 sun rays, just literally right above that rice line. And once the rice is done, what I like to do is I go in there with my rice paddle and I flip the rice from the bottom all the way to the top very quickly. And what that does is all that rice on the top that wasn't really cooked all the way through, it now has a chance for 15 to 30 minutes or so to be at the bottom of the rice pot and and it gets trapped with all that heat. So it allows it to cook a little bit further. And so when you pull it, what ends up happening is your rice is going to be cooked perfectly al dente. If you were to eat that rice, you know, there might be a few kernels that are a little bit hard, but for the most part, it's going to be very, very firm, and it's going to be the perfect substrate for you to go ahead and inoculate. So at that point, after I put it on the tray, I like to cool it down to 90 degrees, because you don't want to send your spores on a death mission by just sprinkling, you know, your spores on super hot rice. That's not going to work. So usually, you know, I wait about 30 minutes or so until it's cooled down, and then I go ahead and inoculate. And what I like to use is I like to use a little sugar canister, you know, something for like powdered sugar. I put in there, and then I sprinkle it over my substrate. And you don't really need a lot. You just need about, I would say, you know, about maybe a thumbnail of spores, or even a pinky nail of spores for a 10 by 12 tray. And then once that's sprinkled, I like to go ahead and mix the substrate. And this is the part where you've kind of, you know, just by touching, you kind of, you know, whether or not you've cleaned your rice good enough. Because what ends up happening is when you're mixing the substrate, if the rice is super sticky, then that means you didn't clean your rice super well, because there's still a lot of excess starch in there. And that's why it's sticking to your fingers. I find that when you clean the rice super well, what ends up happening is I have no problems mixing the rice. If I put my hands in that tray, it doesn't even stick to my hand. It, you know, I mean, it does, but you can simply just, you can just clap it, you know, just kind of shake your hands and the rice will come off. And that to me is the perfect substrate. And then soon after that, I like to put a towel over it, and then put it, you know, dry towel, and I put it into a chamber. I use a old wine cooler, which I'll show in the next slide, for my incubation chamber. But if you don't have that, you know, you can use warm water bottles. You can put it above your fridge, because your fridge is constantly trying to blow out hot air to cool the inside. So I find that right on top of the fridge, like towards the right-hand side, it's usually pretty warm. You putting it into your oven, like I said, with the pilot light on is good. Dehydrator, I know a lot of you mushroom foragers have a dehydrator. That's also a really good way to do it. Unfortunately, you know, the dehydrators that I'm talking about is really the ones like the Excaliburs, for example, or the ones with the door. If you have one of those dehydrators that you kind of just stack with the trays, that's going to be kind of hard. I'll talk about that more in a second with a photo. Or if you have like an immersion circulator, you know, really you just need somewhere warm and humid. And if you can't, if your incubation chamber doesn't have that humidity, you can add that in with a warm towel on top. So, you know, and then after you've put it into your chamber, you want to check on it in 12 hours and check the temperature. You know, the Koji is going to be at 12 hours, it's really going to start generating a lot of heat. And at that point, the enzymes are really trying to feed itself, and they're really establishing that mycelial network by that time. And you know, you can choose to mound the Koji like what I've shown here. I like to just go in with my hands and create those little mounds to really break up the Koji, break up the heat, disperse the heat, and make sure that the temperature kind of stays within the range that I want it to. In this case, I'm making soy sauce, and I really want it to be in, you know, the 86-ish range. So I want to make sure it stays like that. Sometimes, you know, I've gone in and checked it, and it's like above 90, 95, because it's super hot in there as it's establishing itself. So just simply by breaking it up and letting it, you know, cool down for a little bit, that helps immensely. And then, after 36 to 48 hours, that's when I typically pull it. So these are some chamber suggestions that I have. This is an old wine fridge that I actually got an office humidifier. I bought it on Amazon, and then I also bought a reptile heating lamp. You can't really see it here, but it's clipped right here. There's a wooden a piece of wood, and there's a reptile heating terranium heat lamp here. And it's also actually, I didn't take a photo of it, but it's actually plugged into a temperature and humidifier control, so that if it goes above 86 degrees, it lets, I set the degree, the temperature. I also set the humidity percentage. So if it goes over or under, it lets me know, especially if it goes over. If it goes over, there's like this loud shrieking alarm, which is a little alarming. And then you get to it right away. And then if it goes under, it just it turns on that humidifier. Here the light is on, so it turns on that humidifier. It turns on the heating lamp to make sure it generates enough heat. So yeah, so total setup for this, it was about $100, with the wine fridge being free. I pulled it off the side of the road. I actually just pulled another one off the side of the road last week, and we have it in our kitchen here. And we basically decommission it. So we take out all of the old wires, and then we put in this, this humidifier and the heating lamp. And the biggest cost really is the temperature gauge control. That's about $60. The humidifier and the heating, the reptile heating lamp, maybe $15 each. So total cost about $100. If you're interested, you can hop on my Instagram, and I have a photo of this with all of the links to everything that I bought to build this out. Another suggestion that I have is a broad and tailored bread proofer. These things are wonderful. I actually use it to make bread, but I also I actually bought it initially when I first started to make Koji. After I had figured, kind of moved on from my dehydrator. So actually, when I first started, I used this dehydrator. I had bought the dehydrator because it's great for, mushroom hunting. You always have an excess of mushrooms, and, I wanted one with trays in it. And this came with a really, really great warranty. And, I liked how you could with this particular brand, you can dehydrate you can start from 80 degrees, which I really like, to a higher temperature. And I figured, if I want to try to grow Koji at 86 degrees and the lowest setting is 80, that made sense for me. So, this actually worked out really well. But what ends up happening is when you're growing it in a dehydrator, there's a little bit more work that is involved, because it's constantly sucking out the humidity. And so the trick to mitigating that is just putting a tray of water on the bottom, and also making sure that you saran wrap it with plastic and poke some holes in it, so that it traps the moisture and it keeps it wet in there. It was a lot of babysitting for me. So I actually went ahead and bought this bread proofer. This bread proofer is like $120, and I figured I could use it to make bread and yogurts and things like that. And it's really great because you literally just set the temperature that you want. Here it says 85 degrees. You put your trays of Koji in here. You can stack 2 in here. And what's really nice is that you can kind of just set it and forget it. It keeps it nice and humid in here, and it's really great. So those are just a few chamber suggestions that I have. All right, so, talking about what you can do with Koji, something that, I've really, really enjoyed with Koji is really trying to fight food waste with fermentation. I try to, that's actually one of the biggest drivers for shared cultures right now is we really love making soy sauce. We really love making all of these things, but we're trying to figure out how can we try to fight food waste, on a big scale with this stuff. And, that's kind of what I'm working on a day-to-day now, on top of just R&Ding products. Here, I have a few photos of projects that I've done in the past. The first photo is just, Koji with, instead of soybeans, I'm using azuki beans. Trying to play on the sweetness of the beans. When you think about Japanese dessert, you think about azuki beans. And so here I am, you know, actually I will be adding some cinnamon to this for pastry applications. Here I have the second photo here, I have a morel miso that I made. After morel hunting, you always get a whole bunch of, you know, with any type of mushroom, there's always leftover mushrooms. And, you know, I've done shiitake misos, I've done lion's mane misos and things like that. But because morel season, this was about a month ago, kind of really kicked off, I decided to make a morel miso that actually just really finished fermenting. We just started selling that, and that's been a really wonderful product. But here, you know, I have some morel mushrooms. With the morels though, you know, the best way to really do it is you really want to cook them down. I took this, you know, for photo purposes, but after that, you know, you really want to pull it and saute it, do a dry saute, and then reincorporate back into your ferment, because you want to break down all that chitin and morels. You know, most of the time, you know, sometimes people get stomach aches, so you want to make sure you break that down. Here, you know, I have a photo of, actually, this is a really exciting project that we did. It may just look like a jar of paste, but really it is ground up chicken bones. So, you know, most people, when you go and get like a chicken, a rotisserie chicken, it's already been roasted, and then you eat all the chicken, and then, you know, you decide to make a stock from the bones. And, you know, why not take that further, right? Like after, you know, your chicken's been roasted, so it's already been cooked and all the flavors have been imparted in the bones. And then you make a stock out of it. So you've taken pretty much what you can at that point to make a beautiful bone broth. And then you're left with a bunch of bones. And you're like thinking, okay, like what can I do with this? And, you know, why not make a chicken bone / marrow paste? So it's just like a miso, but instead of beans, I substituted all of that chicken marrow and bone that I grinded in a KitchenAid. It's kind of like a meat grinder. So I ground everything in there, and it grinded no problem because the bones were boiled for about 60 minutes or simmered. So everything became soft and gelatinized. And then I combined 50% Koji, 50% you know, the chicken bones and the marrow. And then I did a 13% salt, because just to be safe, because I'm handling poultry here. And then this photo here, actually, this is another way to really mitigate food waste. This is actually mushroom broth. So after, you know, I've gone ahead and, you know, with shiitakes, after I've gone ahead and rehydrated my shiitakes for culinary use, I had a lot of mushroom water available, and I didn't really want to use I didn't really want to make save it for broth or anything like that. I just wanted to make it a little bit more interesting. So what I did was I took that mushroom water, I added Koji, and I did about a 10% salt and let that ferment for 7 days and turned it into a Koji amino acid using Koji amino sauce using the mushroom water. And that's super delicious. And actually, you know, when you do that with all that salt and that fermentation process, it lasts indefinitely in the fridge. Right now, when you go to Trader Joe's or you go to Whole Foods or any healthy organic grocery store, you're seeing a lot of coconut aminos, you know, on the shelf, or, you know, gluten-free options of soy sauce. This is a great way to make it at home at a low cost using food scraps or food waste that you have. So, you know, you can think about, instead of, it doesn't have to be, you know, it could be ramen broth, for example. It could be any type of liquid that you have on hand. Tomato juice, for example. Right now we're in tomato season. If you have a lot of excess of something, you can juice it, salt it, add Koji, and it turns into amino sauce. So that's really exciting for me. You know, here we have a photo of, this is actually sake, my first sake batch that I made. It was quite good. So that's another practical, you know, that's a traditional practical application. And then here, you know, I actually took, you know, when I previously talked about amazake, which is simply just Koji, a fresh starch source, and some water. I fermented this really sweet rice pudding. And then from there, I turned it into sake. And then I added, you know, by adding yeast, and then I added a mother vinegar. And this is how vinegar is made. And then this was my first rice vinegar that I made. And, you know, all of these things are great because you can use it, you know, for quick pickling things. And they're just, you know, saves me a lot of time because, you know, I make these things ahead in advance, and then I go ahead and marinate a salad or something like that. And my dinner prep has gone down. Another way that you can use Koji at home is actually here, the picture to the right was a pop-up dinner that I did a few months ago pre-COVID. This was a beef shank that was, I can't remember the price of it, but it's a really tough cut of meat. And what we did was we actually marinated it in shio koji, or what I like to call a Koji Amino sauce. And that is just simply this photo right here. It's just koji, water, and sea salt fermented over a week. And once all of those amino acids are out and they're developed, what I did was I just marinated it in that. And because all those enzymes are super alive, it goes in to break down the proteins in like a cheaper cut of meat, really tenderizing it. So it was a very, very delicious, tender piece of meat that we were able to present to our guests. It was a beautiful, delicious plate. For relatively cheap. And actually below that, the picture of the meat, we actually also did a Koji was a Koji rice cake. So this photo here, what do you do with all of that excess Koji that's been sitting there? We went ahead and strained it, and then turn and fry, actually added a little bit more rice, and then deep fried it into kind of like a, you would think like a hash brown, but it's basically like a rice cake that's been deep fried. And so that was super delicious and just really balanced out the meat in the sense that, it was the yin to the yang of the meat, right? Like you're using the liquids to marinate the meat. And what do you do with the solids? We made a rice cake out of it. This photo here is actually something that I was just, I was like, oh, why not? I just want to see if it works. I have grown Koji on pork chops before. I don't have a photo here. I couldn't find it, but I found a photo of some Koji that I had grew on bacon, just to kind of test it out. So I grew the Koji, I incubated the bacon, I sprinkled the spores on the bacon, and incubated it at 75 degrees, and just to see how it would taste. And you could really, it smelled so good because all of that fat and that bacon had just been broken down by these enzymes and the protein, and what I did was I fried it, and it had almost like, I would say like a gluten-free crust almost. It looked like somebody had gone ahead and like battered it into something, because all of that, all those enzymes, all that fungi, it was just grown directly on top of the meat, and it formed this beautiful gluten-free kind of crust, and it was delicious. So and if you want more information, all of these photos are actually pulled from my Instagram, so you can just go to my Instagram at Shared Cultures, and these are all from various points, and you can scroll through my feed to kind of learn more. I typically break down the process of how everything is made, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me independently. Okay, so here is a quick recipe chart that I made, talking about how you could simply do these things at home. And really what it is, I talked about this amazake. It's the pre-sake, simply a sake rice pudding. And with this application, you're really trying to extract sugar. So, in this sense, your proportion would be 1 part Koji, 1 part water, 1 part starch. You would combine that together and you would incubate it. I should have put the temperature actually there. That was kind of my bad, but you would pretty much incubate this at 100 degrees. So once you combine all of these ingredients, actually, I would just put it right back in the rice cooker. If you put the rice cooker on warm, a standard rice cooker, it's about 120, 130 degrees that it holds the temperature at. So overnight, you're going to have the secondary fermentation happen. And so with this, you can pull out sweetness. You don't have to have, for example, you don't have to have rice as your starch, right? Like when we think about making sake, it's the Koji grown on rice, and then it's the water, and then you add starch. All of these things are interchangeable. Let's say like if you have an excess of sweet potatoes, you could put that in there. You have an excess of bananas, you could put that in there. Anything that you haven't, as long as there's a starch component, you can go ahead and switch that out. Same thing with, the koji in the water for everything else. It doesn't have to be rice koji. It could be bean koji. It doesn't have to be just water. It could be tomato juice. It could be cucumber water. It could be watermelon. I mean, any type of liquid. It could be ramen broth. The combinations are really endless, and it's really up to you and your imagination. And so, here with misos, or what we like to call amino paste, it's the same exact idea, right? It could be any type of koji grown on whatever you'd like, no water, and no starch, and just some protein. Here I had previously talked about the chicken bones and the marrow, something like that could yield an interesting result. And then, depending on how long you want to ferment it, like for example, something like, a deeply rich ferment is going to be like up to a year. And at that point, I like to do 15%. If you're looking for a shorter ferment, I would do 5% salt. So it really, really depends on what you'd like. Something, for 5% salt that I can think of right now that I've done that's really delicious is, I've taken koji that I've grown on rice and I fermented it, or, the miso, the paste, and actually instead of protein, I did starch here, so you can actually interchange these two, but I did it with bananas, old bananas. So I had dried the bananas and I mashed it together to create a banana miso, and that was delicious. So just really depending on what you want to make, all of these proportions are, it's a easy quick guideline. Something else here, I like to say it's an amino sauce. So like soy sauces or any of these koji amino sauces, it's the same exact idea. The proportion here is just add a little bit more water. It's just like a miso, but you just add a little bit more water. And then with, soy sauces, because they go for 6 months to a year, I like to salt them to 10 to 13%. And then you're just checking your ferment to make sure that, it tastes good, and, you just want to check on it. So yeah, so this is just kind of a easy chart that I made to kind of help guide some of the guidelines, instead of using, 200 grams and 500 grams and, giving an exact recipe. I find that this proportion chart is a little bit easier to understand based on what you have, because everybody has different things, and your imagination is what is going to take you there. So a few more other resources that I actually pulled up. When I first started, the first book I actually got was The Art of Fermentation by Sandor Katz. There's a great koji chapter in there. And then this is, that's a really, really great book. And then, the Noma Guide to Fermentation, a lot of people actually now, because of, Noma being one of the best restaurants in the world, and people know about this, and this book came out, and initially it was kind of more like not only are people buying it because it's a great coffee table book, but it actually breaks down things in a way for everyone to really understand, and they have really detailed pictures and really show you how to do certain things. In this, I don't know what's going on in the Noma book. One of my favorite things that I like, one of my favorite recipes is, they talk about this different types of soy sauces, right? So instead of soybeans, at Noma in Denmark, their native bean is really like this yellow pea. So instead of soybeans, they substitute with yellow pea to make this delicious amino sauce, which is really inspiring and great. So the Noma Guide is a great book. Another book that just recently came out is Koji Alchemy. That's a really great book. It speaks all on koji, which is awesome. And Rich and Jeremy have been the pioneers of really getting this revitalization, them and the Noma folks, but they really have gone past just the practical the traditional applications, and really pushing it forward and to more modern techniques. And then Miso Tempeh and Natto is also an awesome book, similar to to Renee Redzepi and David Zilber and Rich and Jeremy, the Shakis have really been able to compile a bunch of recipes speaking on not only just the traditional applications of handling and making koji at home, but also, they provide these modern recipes. In it, you'll find how to make everything from, the standard stuff to like, I think there's one of my favorite recipes in there is like their nut ferment. Instead of soybeans, for example, they use, I believe, macadamia nuts, to kind of sub out for like a vegan cheese. And that's something that we've actually adopted here at Shared Cultures. We do a cashew, which is super delicious, and great on crackers and things like that. So yeah, so all of these books are, things that I highly recommend, just really reading them and starting to kind of figure out, looking at their recipes and then understanding, the fundamentals, and then being like, okay, how can I push this further into something that I have, available in my kitchen. I might not have this bean, but I have this bean. I might not have, this, but if I look at the protein content on the package, or if I look at, how much fat is in this, can I sub it out for something else? So I highly recommend these 4 books to anybody that is interested in reading more about Koji. I certainly own all of these books, and I turn to them all the time when I have a question that, that's on my head. And so, so these books are great. And then I just want to talk a little bit more about Shared Cultures. So, we're based in San Francisco. The company is based with me and my partner, Kevin Gondo. I actually started this journey through mushroom foraging. So I really started my journey through finding a whole bunch of, finding mushrooms in the forest. And then from there, it really went to finding berries and wild plants, and then figuring out, okay, like what the heck am I going to do with the surplus of the bounty that I'm finding? And then I started reading books on fermentation, and, Sandor Katz really has this amazing book, and, he taught me a lot about fermentation. And from there, I learned about Koji, and I was like, wait, Koji's a fungi, and wait, I like fermentation, and wait, wow, everything's making sense now. So that's kind of how Shared Cultures really, really started. But yeah, so my background is I'm Chinese American, and Kevin is Japanese American, and together, we are really trying to fight food waste with Koji, while incorporating our traditional and our American heritage into our products. So a few things that we make, we have our Koji soy sauce that's really great, and then the cashew miso, which I talked a little bit about. We also sell Koji itself, if you want to purchase that and make your own, or we have spores to inoculate things with. And then we also have like educational kits, like these soy sauce kits, which are super fun to be able to make your own soy sauce at home, and it comes with instructions. And yeah, and that's it. And so that's the end of my presentation. I am going to kind of turn it back and see if there are any questions now, and then we can roll from there.
Thanks, Elena. That was great.
Thanks.
Let me look at we have a few comments and a couple questions. So I'll start from the beginning here. Oh, well, you might have answered. I had some questions I was writing down, and you answered them eventually. So
Okay.
Lori says, soy sauce. Is there a good soy sauce that is available in the US? Well, you make a soy sauce with Shared Cultures. So there's that one. Is there another soy sauce that you found that is really amazing in the United States?
Yeah, so there is this company, I can go ahead and grab it real quick, and I like them because they're a small batch artisanal soy sauce maker, just like us, and grab it real quick. So I have this company here, Keep Well. They're really great. They have the soy sauce. I actually purchased it to kind of see if it tastes like ours, and it does. So that's kind of good. And that's amazing. And then they also offer like this white soy sauce. So it actually is, there's just more wheat in this. Or actually, yeah, there's more wheat in this. And so this is super delicious. It's a little bit lighter. It's fermented for a little bit less time. So yeah, I like these two. It's by Keep Well Vinegar. They actually have a promo right now. I think 30% off on their website and free shipping if you're like past like $30 or something like that. So I actually bought a whole bunch of their stuff, not just soy sauce, but I also bought like an heirloom tomato vinegar, which is really nice. I bought a ginger vinegar, which is really nice. So yeah, so that's a great company that I like to keep in mind.
Cool. And then if people wanted to buy your soy sauce, can they do that online or is it only local?
Oh no, so we do ship. Actually, we're in the process of setting up our online shop, but if you just send me a message or email me, I'm happy to send you a product list, and then we can, and then what we do is we typically put everything in a, a medium USPS priority shipping box, which is $15 shipping. And then we try to shove as many products in there as possible if that's something you're interested in. And most of the time I have had some friends like share things, like they'll just want one or two things. And then I put everything in the box and it gets kind of divvied up that way. Yeah, so just send me an email and I'm happy to shoot over the list.
Cool. We have another comment. Robert says, a company called Prime Roots is using Koji to recreate vegan bacon. Do you know anything about vegan bacon?
Yeah, I do. So yeah, Prime Roots is actually based right here in the Bay Area, and I've met the co-founders many times because we've done a lot of events together. I have not tried this vegan bacon yet, and what they do is they actually grow the Koji. They don't grow it like how I do it. So, I do it kind of the traditional way where I'm growing it on the substrate themselves. They're growing it through liquid culture, and they're putting them in these big bioreactors and growing it that way. I don't have any experience in that. I know that another company my friend Jake works for is called Wild Earth, and they make this amazing dog food, which is made with Koji. And it's a great mission because, instead of, sourcing all this protein and all this food from like these secondary like meat farm, like secondary meat essentially that gets turned into dog food. They're growing all this Koji in these bioreactors and then turning that into dog food, which is really cool. But that's something I really would like to learn more about, but I don't have too much experience, even with mushroom inoculation using liquid culture. I've done it a few times, but to be able to do it on a big scale and using Koji, that's not something I have any experience with.
Some people seem really excited about the Morel miso,
Cool.
the chicken bone Koji paste.
Yeah.
Let's see. Misako says, I made it with adzuki beans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I had done. So I done it with the azuki beans because in Japanese and even Chinese desserts, it's always used. Red bean paste is a very common dessert. So I figured with that miso that I made, I did more Koji to add and impart more sweetness. And then what I'm going to do is it's actually going to be ready in the next few weeks here. I'm going to actually add cinnamon to it. And then that's going to be like a really interesting modern miso because I like to use miso in pastries. I like to make cookies and things like that. So I'm going to just put a few tablespoons in there with my cookie dough and then bake it out. And I think it'll be super, super good. So.
Misako says, yeah, they made amazake with adzuki beans.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Really cool.
And then Jessica says, how do you get the Koji spores?
Okay, so there are actually 6 Koji producers in Japan right now. And so most people source from them. And then so I like to source, I have sourced from one person in particular, Haguchi. He's based out of Japan, and actually I got the spores from Jeremy Mansky. So, but you can also buy from Gem Cultures. They have a really easy way to go online. It's not super easy. It's an outdated website, but you can buy cultures from them, or you can go, if you're interested in just like a little starter pack, I sell the same spores. What I do is I just put them in these little bags, and it's $5 a bag for 5 grams. And then I ship them for the cost of a stamp, 55 cents plants for the forever stamp. And I can send you an envelope full of spores depending on what you'd like. So that's an easy way to try, because when you're buying it, even from gem cultures, it's relatively cheap, but you're committing like $30. And so if you're wanting to just start small, like you can just contact me and I'm happy to just divvy up my spores and send your way for the cost of a stamp.
Cool. Great. I think that's all the questions. We can just wait a second, see if anything else rolls in, but thanks so much. This was really informative, and it seems, you know, we were talking about this giant flow hood over here to do anything indoors with macro fungi, I guess, and this seems more easy to do in your own home, right? With less,
Yeah.
I guess, contamination problems.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think with Koji, you have a little bit more leeway. I know that, you know, we've grown mushrooms at home too, and it's just like, you know, we've been super careful. And then I don't know how it gets contaminated, you know, even in the glove box and everything sprayed down with isopropyl and, you know, and then like a few weeks later, it's like, oh crap, that batch is not doing good. There's something in there. But with, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why with mushroom propagation, you know, you'll do like 10 to 12 jars at a time of grain, and you're just like hoping that more than half are going to be good. But with Koji, it's you know, with the fungi, it really outcompetes everything else, and it's a little bit, you know, easier. You know, I can propagate. I don't have to propagate, or you know, I don't have to inoculate in a grow box. I can just do it in my kitchen. You know, you just want to make sure that everything is clean, basically, and it's, you know, it's actually pretty, it seems a little bit at first when you first start, like a little bit like, oh, whoa, what's going on? But that's like with everything else. And once you do it like once or twice, you kind of realize how easy it is. And it's just really over time, the repetition of really refining it to make it better. That's kind of more the harder part, but really getting it to start, you know, just starting off, like you'll realize that this fungi really wants to grow. It really wants to get out there. So as long as you provide it the right conditions, it'll take off.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I don't see any other questions, so I guess we can call it a wrap. Thanks so much. This is great.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and this has been great. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.